Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Samuel Grimwald, and I've been a forest ranger for 9 years now. Before that, I spent 6 years down in the coal mines, just like my daddy and his daddy before him. The mountains of Southwest Virginia run black with coal, and for generations, my family pulled that black gold from the earth. I quit mining the day my brother Tommy died in a cave-in at Sunset Ridge, 23 years old, with a baby on the way. They never found his body, said the whole section collapsed too bad to dig through safely. That was 11 years ago, but I still wake up some nights hearing the mountain groan and crack. Now I work for the Jefferson National Forest, specializing in mine safety. Folks think it's strange that I'd want anything to do with mines after what happened to Tommy. Truth is, somebody's got to keep people safe from these old death traps scattered through our mountains. The mining companies pulled out decades ago, but they left behind hundreds of abandoned shafts and tunnels. Kids love exploring them. Hikers stumble across them, and every year we pull somebody out who got lost or hurt in the dark. I don't believe in ghost stories. Never have. When old-timers talk about dead miners still walking the tunnels, I tell them it's just bad air playing tricks on their minds. Methane gas can make you see things that aren't there. Carbon monoxide makes you dizzy and confused. And grief, well, grief can make you see whatever you need to see to keep going. This story starts on a February morning in 1984. Snow had been falling for 3 days straight, blocking most of the mountain roads. I was checking my equipment in the ranger station when the call came in. 3 teenagers had gone missing near the old Black Lung mine about 15 miles up Copper Creek Road. Black Lung shut down in 1924 after a disaster that killed 47 men. The mine flooded during a spring storm, and towns. They never got all the bodies out. Local folks have been telling stories about that place ever since. Lights moving in the tunnels, sounds of pickaxes echoing from sealed shafts, miners' voices calling for help. Every Halloween, some kid dares another to spend the night at Black Lung. Most come running back within an hour, swearing they heard things that couldn't be there. The missing kids were from Grundy. 2 boys and a girl, all 17. They'd told their parents they were going camping, but a farmer saw them hiking toward Black Lung with flashlights and backpacks. In this weather, they'd be lucky to survive a night in the open. I loaded my truck with winter rescue gear, emergency blankets, first aid supplies, battery-powered heaters, and enough rope to reach the bottom of any shaft they might have fallen into. My mine safety equipment went in too: gas detector, emergency breathing apparatus, and my helmet with the bright LED headlamp. I'd learned never to enter any mine, no matter how briefly, without proper protection. The drive up Copper Creek Road took 2 hours in the snow. My 4-wheel drive struggled on the steep, winding curves, but I knew these mountains better than most. The road ended at an old logging camp, still 3 miles from the mine entrance. I'd have to hike the rest of the way. The forest was dead quiet except for snow falling through pine branches. Usually these mountains are alive with sound, birds calling, squirrels chattering, wind through the trees. But that morning, everything felt muffled and wrong. Even my footsteps seemed too loud. Black Lung Mine sat in a narrow valley between 2 ridges. The main entrance was a dark hole in the mountainside, surrounded by rusted mining equipment and collapsed wooden structures. Warning signs posted by the state covered every surface. Danger. Unstable mine. Keep out. Someone had cut the chain across this entrance. Fresh footprints in the snow led straight into the tunnel. I checked my gas detector and switched on my headlamp. The beam cut through the darkness about 20 feet before being swallowed up. The tunnel sloped downward, with wooden support beams every few yards. Some looked solid, others sagged dangerously. Water dripped somewhere deeper in the mine, each drop echoing like a clock ticking. I called out, "Hello, Forest Service! If anyone's down here, call back!" My voice bounced off the walls and faded into silence. Then, from somewhere far below, came what sounded like a response. Distant and unclear, but definitely human. My heart jumped. Maybe the kids were okay after all. That's when I noticed something strange. The air coming from deeper in the mine felt warm. Not just warmer than outside, actually warm, like breath on a cold morning. After 60 years, abandoned mines usually stay the same temperature as the surrounding rock. This felt different, wrong, but I had a job to do. 3 kids were down there somewhere, and I was probably their only chance of getting out alive. The main tunnel dropped steadily for about 100 yards before branching into smaller passages. My footprints mixed with the teenagers' tracks in the muddy floor. They'd stayed together so far, which was smart. Getting separated in a mine was usually a death sentence. I paused at the first branch and checked my gas detector. Clean air, no dangerous gases detected. But that warm breeze kept flowing up from the depths, carrying a smell I couldn't quite identify. Not the musty, dead air you'd expect from an old mine. This smelled like coal dust. Fresh coal dust, as if someone had been mining recently. The left tunnel looked more stable, so I followed the footprints that way. My headlamp revealed old mining equipment scattered along the walls, rusty shovels, broken wheelbarrows, and coils of rotted rope. Everything covered in decades of dust and bat droppings. Normal abandoned mine stuff. Except for the mining cart sitting on intact rails about 50 yards down the tunnel, and I stopped and stared at it. The cart looked old, but not rusted through like everything else. The wooden sides were solid, and the metal wheels showed recent wear marks on the rails. But according to every record I'd studied, no mining equipment had been moved in or out of Black Lung since the 1924 disaster. The state had sealed the main entrances multiple times over the years. I called out again. "Hello? Can you hear me? This is Ranger Grimwald with the Forest Service." This time the answer came back clearer, definitely a young voice, maybe one of the missing kids. But it sounded strange, like it was coming through water or from much farther away than seemed possible. "Help us! We're trapped!" The voice echoed from deeper in the left tunnel. I hurried forward, following the cart tracks and footprints. The tunnel curved sharply to the right, then opened into a wider chamber. My headlamp revealed more mining equipment, all in the same strangely good condition. Pickaxes leaning against the walls looked like they'd been used recently. A pile of coal chunks sat near what looked like a working area, but coal mining stopped at Black Lung in 1924. These tools should be rusted to pieces. The teenagers' tracks led across the chamber toward another tunnel entrance. As I followed them, my boot kicked something soft. I looked down and nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a backpack, modern, bright blue, with "Property of Grundy High School" written in permanent marker. One of the missing kids had dropped it here. I opened it and found textbooks, a half-eaten sandwich, and a thermos still warm with hot chocolate. They'd been here recently. Very recently. "Hello?" I shouted louder. "I found your backpack. Where are you?" No answer this time, just that steady dripping from somewhere ahead, and a new sound I hadn't noticed before, a rhythmic tapping like metal hitting stone. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Someone was using a pickaxe. I moved toward the sound, my gas detector beeping softly as it tested the air. Still safe, but my hands were shaking as I adjusted. My grip on the flashlight. The warm air was getting stronger, carrying more of that fresh coal dust smell. The tunnel narrowed again, forcing me to duck in places where the ceiling sagged. The pickaxe sounds were getting louder and more distinct. Definitely someone working with a tool, chipping away at rock or coal. But it didn't make sense. What would 3 teenagers be doing with mining equipment in an abandoned shaft? I rounded another bend and saw light ahead. Not electric light, but the warm, flickering glow of lanterns or torches. My headlamp caught movement in the shadows, and I heard voices talking quietly. Relief flooded through me. The kids were alive and apparently safe. "Hey!" I called out. "Forest Service, are you okay?" The voices stopped immediately. The pickaxe sounds stopped too. Everything went completely silent except for my own breathing and heartbeat. I moved toward where I'd seen the light, but my headlamp beam found only empty tunnel. No people, no lanterns, no mining equipment, just bare rock walls and puddles of standing water. But the air still smelled like coal dust, and the ground under my boots felt warm. I stood there for a full minute trying to make sense of what I'd seen and heard. Maybe the kids had heard me coming and hidden in a side passage, playing some kind of stupid game. Or maybe the bad air was starting to affect my mind, making me see things. That's when my gas detector started beeping urgently. The small screen flashed red. Methane detected. Dangerous levels. I needed to get out of there fast. Methane gas could explode with the smallest spark, and my headlamp battery was getting old, but I couldn't leave without the teenagers. I started back toward the main chamber, moving as quickly as I dared. The methane readings dropped as I climbed, and I began to breathe easier. Maybe I could get outside, radio for backup, and return wit, with proper equipment and more rangers. Then I heard the scream. It came from behind me, back in the direction of the flickering lights. A young person's voice, terrified and desperate. One of the missing teenagers was in serious trouble. I spun around and ran back down the tunnel, ignoring my gas detector's warnings. The beam of my headlamp bounced wildly as I stumbled over loose rocks and puddles. The scream came again, closer this time, followed by other voices shouting for help. I burst into the chamber where I'd seen the lights before. This time my headlamp caught them clearly. 3 figures huddled against the far wall. 2 boys and a girl, exactly matching the descriptions of the missing teenagers. They looked terrified, soaked, and half-frozen. "Thank God," I gasped, running toward them. "Are you hurt? We need to get out of here right now." But as I got closer, something was wrong with what I was seeing. The kids were there, solid and real, but they weren't moving. They stared straight ahead with wide, empty eyes. Their clothes were wrong too. Old-fashioned work shirts and pants like pictures I'd seen of miners from the 1920s. And they were covered in coal dust, head to toe, as if they'd been working underground for hours. I stopped running. My headlamp beam was shining directly on them, but they didn't react to the light at all. They just stood there, perfectly still, staring at nothing. "Hey," I said quietly. "Can you hear me?" The girl turned her head toward me. Her face was young but somehow ancient, with coal dust streaked down her cheeks like black tears. When she spoke, her voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "The mountain's not safe. There's going to be a cave-in." That's when I realized these weren't the missing teenagers. These weren't teenagers at all. I backed away from the 3 figures, my heart hammering against my ribs. The girl took a step toward me, and I could see right through her to the rock wall behind. Her companions, 2 young men who couldn't be more than 20, flickered like candle flames in a breeze. "The water's rising," one of the men said in that same hollow voice. "We have to get everyone out before the shaft floods." My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Methane poisoning could cause hallucinations. Carbon monoxide made people confused and disoriented. But my gas detector wasn't showing dangerous levels of either. And these figures looked and sounded too real to be products of my imagination. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "Miners," the girl said, as if it should be obvious. "We work the deep seam, but something's wrong with the pumps. The water keeps rising." The deep seam. According to the historical records I'd studied, the deep seam at Black Lung had been where most of the 47 miners died in 1924. They'd been trapped when a flash flood broke through the shaft walls. These 3 looked exactly like the miners I'd seen in old photographs from that era. I needed to get out of there and radio for help. But what would I tell my supervisor? That I'd found 3 ghosts in an abandoned mine? They'd pull me off mine safety duty and probably recommend psychiatric evaluation. "The teenagers," I said. 3 kids from Grundy. Have you seen them?" The figures exchanged glances. The taller man nodded toward a passage I hadn't noticed before, hidden in the shadows behind some fallen timbers. "They went down to help with the rescue," he said, "but they don't know about the gas pocket in Section 7. Someone needs to warn them." Gas pocket. That could kill the missing teenagers in minutes if they hit it wrong. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I approached the hidden passage. The 3 ghostly miners watched me with expressions of desperate hope. "Please," the girl whispered. "Save them. We couldn't save ourselves, but maybe." Her voice trailed off as she began to fade. Within seconds, all three had vanished completely, leaving only the smell of coal dust and the echo of dripping water. I squeezed through the gap in the fallen timbers and found myself in another tunnel, this one sloping steeply downward. Fresh footprints in the mud confirmed that the teenagers had come this way. But these prints looked strange, too clear and detailed, as if they'd been made in soft clay instead of the packed dirt and rock that covered most of the mine floor. My headlamp beam stretched ahead for maybe 30 feet before disappearing into darkness. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for one person, with wooden support beams that creaked ominously as I passed underneath. The air here felt different, thicker, warmer, and carrying new sounds from somewhere far below. Voices calling back and forth, the clang of metal tools, the rumble of machinery. But there was no machinery in Black Lung Mine. There hadn't been for 60 years. I followed the footprints down the sloping passage, checking my gas detector every few steps. Clean air, no dangerous readings. The sounds grew louder as I descended, definitely people working, probably a dozen or more voices echoing up from the depths. The tunnel leveled out and opened into a vast underground chamber that shouldn't have existed. My headlamp revealed mining operations in full swing. Lanterns hung from wooden posts, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Men in period mining gear worked coal seams with pickaxes and shovels. A narrow-gauge railway ran through the center of the chamber, with loaded carts being pushed toward a tunnel entrance on the far side. It looked exactly like photographs I'd seen of active mining operations from the 1920s. And there, helping to load coal into one of the carts, were the 3 missing teenagers. I called out to them, but they didn't seem to hear me. They worked alongside the ghostly miners as if this was perfectly normal. The girl from Grundy, Jennifer, according to the missing persons report, was shoveling coal chunks into a wooden cart. The 2 boys were following a miner toward what looked like a working coal seam. None of them acknowledged my presence, even when I shouted their names. I started toward them, but one of the ghostly miners stepped into my path. He was an older man with a gray beard and kind eyes. His mining helmet bore the number 23. "You can't go down there," he said gently. "The gas pocket's leaking. One spark and the whole section goes up." "Those are real kids," I said. "Living kids. They don't belong here." "Neither did we," the old miner replied. "But the mountain keeps us busy. Always more coal to dig, more workers to save. The water's been rising for 60 years, but we keep pumping it out." I looked around the impossible chamber. Everything appeared solid and real. The workers, the equipment, the coal-stained walls. But it was all wrong. The lighting was too warm for electric bulbs, the clothing too old-fashioned, and the miners themselves moved with a dreamlike quality. "You're all dead," I said quietly. "The mine flooded in 1924. You drowned." The old miner's expression grew sad but not surprised. "Some of us remember that, others don't. But the work continues. The mountain needs us." "What about the kids? They're alive. They have families." "They're helping with the rescue," he said, "just like you came to help. But once you start working the deep seams, it's hard to leave. The mountain needs workers." That's when I understood the real danger. The 3 teenagers weren't just lost or trapped. They were being absorbed into some kind of endless replay of the 1924 mining operation. The dead miners, still working their shifts after 6 decades, were recruiting new help. I had to reach the kids before they became permanent residents of this ghostly workplace. I pushed past the old miner and ran toward the coal carts where I'd seen Jennifer, but as I got closer she became translucent, like the others. Her modern clothes, flickered between jeans and sweatshirt and the rough work clothes of a 1920s miner. "Jennifer," I shouted, "you need to come with me now." She looked up from her work, but her eyes were empty and distant. "Can't stop," she said, in that same hollow voice I'd heard from the others. "The water's rising. We have to keep the pumps going." I grabbed her arm and my hand passed right through her. She was becoming one of them. The sound of rushing water suddenly echoed from multiple tunnels around the chamber. The ghostly miners looked up from their work with expressions of panic. "The shaft's flooding," someone yelled. "Everyone to the pumps." The entire Phantom operation erupted into chaos. Miners ran in all directions, shouting orders and warnings. Lanterns swung wildly, throwing crazy shadows on the walls. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I lost sight of the 3 teenagers. The water sound grew louder and more urgent. Looking down at my feet, I saw muddy water beginning to seep across the chamber floor. The 1924 disaster was replaying itself, and I was caught right in the middle of it. If I didn't find those kids and get them out in the next few minutes, we'd all drown together in a flooding mine that had killed 47 people 60 years ago. The Phantom floodwater reached my ankles within minutes. It was ice cold and real enough to soak through my boots. Around me, ghostly miners splashed through the rising water, their voices echoing with the same panic they must have felt in 1924. I fought my way through the chaos, searching for the 3 teenagers. The old miner with the gray beard grabbed my arm, his touch solid now, painful in its urgency. "This way," he shouted over the roar of rushing water. "The emergency exit." "Not without the kids," I shouted back. "They're already gone. The mountain took them when the shift whistle blew." I pulled free and waded deeper, into the chamber, following the narrow-gauge railway toward where I'd last seen the 2 boys. My headlamp cut through the swirling shadows of panicked miners, but I couldn't find any trace of living teenagers. The water reached my knees. From somewhere above, I heard the deep groan of shifting rock. Wooden support beams began to crack and splinter under enormous pressure. Then I saw them. All 3 teenagers stood waist-deep in floodwater near the far wall, but they weren't trying to escape. They were working frantically at a manual water pump, taking turns at the heavy handle, completely focused on their impossible task. "The pump's broken," Jennifer called to her companions. "We need more hands." I slogged through the rising water toward them. "Jennifer, Mike, David, you have to come with me now." They looked at me with recognition for the first time, but their eyes held the same desperate emptiness I'd seen in the ghostly miners. "Can't leave," Mike gasped, straining at the pump handle. "People are still trapped in Section 7. We have to keep pumping or they'll drown." "There's nobody in Section 7. I grabbed him and pulled him away from the pump. "Those people died 60 years ago. You're trying to save ghosts." For a moment, Mike's expression cleared. He looked around the chamber with confusion and growing horror. Where are we? How did we get down here?" But before I could answer, one of the Phantom miners appeared beside us. It was the girl I'd first encountered, still looking like a teenager but wearing the face of someone who'd seen terrible things. "Don't listen to him," she told Mike gently. "He doesn't understand. The water's rising in Section 7. We need every hand on the pumps." Mike's eyes glazed over again. He turned back to the pump handle. I realized what was happening. The dead miners weren't trying to hurt the teenagers. They were trying to save them. In their minds, they were still fighting the 1924 flood, still trying to rescue their trapped friends. They'd recruited living people to help with an impossible rescue that had failed 6 decades ago. The water reached my chest. Above us, the ceiling began to crack. Chunks of rock splashed into the flood around us. "Listen to me," I shouted to all 3 teenagers. "Your names are Jennifer Walsh, Mike Chen, and David Morrison. You're 17 years old. You go to Grundy High School. Your parents are looking for you." Jennifer stopped pumping and stared at me. I remember. My mom made me promise to be home by 10. "What time is it?" "It doesn't matter what time it is," the Phantom girl said urgently. "The pumps matter. The rescue matters. Don't you want to save lives?" The ceiling groaned ominously. More rocks fell, and I realized we had maybe 2 minutes before the whole chamber collapsed. "You can't save them," I yelled at the ghostly miners. "They're already dead. You're already dead. The flood happened in 1924. It's over." The Phantom miners stopped their frantic activity. The old man with the gray beard looked at me with infinite sadness. "We know," he whispered. "We've always known. But if we stop working, if we stop trying to save them, then they died for nothing." "They didn't die for nothing," I said, my voice gentler now. "They died doing their jobs, trying to make a living for their families. But you can't change what happened. You can only let these kids go home to their families. The water reached my shoulders. The 3 teenagers were floating now, still trying to work the submerged pump handle. Their movements were becoming slow and dreamlike, just like the ghostly miners. I had one last idea. "What are your names?" I asked the phantom miners. "Your real names, not your employee numbers." The old miner hesitated. William Jameson. I had a wife, Sarah, 2 daughters. "Where are they now, William?" "Dead," he said quietly. "Long dead. Sarah remarried after the accident. The girls grew up without me." "Then you kept your promise," I said. "You worked hard to provide for them. They had good lives because you were willing to risk your life in these mines. Your job is done." One by one, other miners began to speak their names. Robert Hayes, who had a son starting school. Thomas Mitchell, saving money to buy his own farm. James Crawford, whose mother needed medicine. As they remembered their real lives, their real families, the phantom mining operation began to fade. The pumps stopped working. The lanterns dimmed. The water continued to rise, but the desperate urgency was leaving their faces. "What about us?" the phantom girl asked. "We never got to have families, never got to grow old." "You were brave," I told her. "You died trying to help your friends. That courage lives on. But these kids need to go home and live the lives you never got to have." She looked at Jennifer, Mike, and David, who were now floating unconscious in the rising water. With great effort, she helped me grab them and start swimming toward the tunnel entrance. The ghostly miners began to disappear one by one, but not with sadness. They looked peaceful, as if a great weight had been lifted from their shoulders. The old miner was the last to fade. "Take care of them," he said. "Take care of all the living ones." Then he was gone, and I was alone in a flooded mine with 3 unconscious teenagers and water up to my neck. The chamber was collapsing behind us. I had to get these kids out before we all became permanent residents of Black Lung Mine. I don't remember much about getting out of that mine. The emergency breathing apparatus in my pack gave me just enough air to swim the 3 kids through the flooded tunnels to higher ground. By the time I reached the main entrance, hypothermia was setting in for all of us. The rescue team found us an hour later, thanks to the GPS beacon in my equipment. Jennifer, Mike, and David spent 3 days in the hospital, being treated for exposure and mild carbon monoxide poisoning. They remembered going into the mine to explore, but everything after that was a blank. The official report listed the cause as disorientation due to bad air and underground flooding from snowmelt. Nobody questioned my story about finding them trapped in a flooded chamber. The teenagers' memory loss was explained as trauma from nearly drowning. But I knew better. The state sealed Black Lung Mine permanently 2 weeks later. They used concrete instead of just chains this time and posted armed guards until the job was done. The official reason was public safety due to structural instability. I requested the assignment to oversee the sealing. As the concrete trucks finished their work, I stood in the falling snow and said a quiet prayer for William Jameson, Robert Hayes, Thomas Mitchell, James Crawford, and all the others. 47 miners who had worked themselves to death in 1924, then kept working for 60 more years because they couldn't bear to give up. The 3 teenagers went back to their normal lives. Jennifer graduated valedictorian and became a teacher. Mike studied geology and now works for the mining industry, promoting safer practices. David joined the Coast Guard and has saved dozens of lives in water rescues. Sometimes I wonder if the ghostly miners knew what they were doing when they chose those 3 kids to help with their impossible rescue. All 3 grew up to dedicate their lives to helping others, just like the miners had tried to do. I kept working mine safety for another 15 years before retiring. During that time, I sealed or secured over 100 abandoned mines throughout Southwest Virginia. Every one of them got a proper memorial service afterward. Just a few words of respect for the men who had died working in the darkness, trying to provide for their families. But Black Lung was different. Even with the entrance sealed, I still get reports of strange sounds from that valley. Hikers hear pickaxes echoing for inside the mountain. Campers see lights moving in the forest where no lights should be. Last month, a group of college geology students reported hearing voices calling for help near the old mine site. When the rescue team arrived, they found no sign of anyone in distress, but their equipment detected warm air rising from cracks in the rock around the sealed entrance. The mountain remembers, and maybe some kinds of work never really end. I tell people that Black Lung Mine is dangerous because of unstable rock and toxic gases. That's true enough. But the real danger isn't the mountain itself. It's the love and dedication of men who died trying to help others and who might still be trying to help 60 years later. The dead don't always know they're dead. Sometimes they need help moving on, and sometimes they need help finishing the job they started. My name is Samuel Grimwald, and I've learned that there are worse things than ghosts in abandoned mines. There are ghosts who refuse to give up. If you ever find yourself near an old mine site and you hear voices calling for help, think carefully before you answer. The mountain is full of people who came to help and never left. Some of them have been working the same shift for a very long time. My name is Jonathan Brightwater, and I've been a park ranger in the North Carolina mountains for 13 years. Before that, I was an Army medic for 6 years. I came to these mountains looking for peace after seeing too much blood and hearing too many last words. The Blue Ridge gave me what I needed: quiet mornings, clean air, and problems I could actually solve. People always ask if I believe in mountain magic. The old-timers love their stories about herb women and spirits in the woods. I tell them the same thing every time. What folks call magic is usually just good medicine mixed with superstition. I've got medical training. I know how the human body works. I know which plants actually help and which ones just make people feel better because they want to believe. My station covers Pisgah National Forest, including Raven's Roost Overlook. It's a beautiful spot. Rocky cliffs that look out over miles of green mountains. The hiking trail up there is steep and narrow. Most tourists stick to the easier paths, which is fine by me. Raven's Roost attracts the serious hikers, the ones who know how to take care of themselves. At least, that's what I thought. It was October 1972, peak season for leaflookers and hunters. I was checking my equipment before heading out on patrol: first aid supplies, radio, though it doesn't work well up at the Roost, compass, emergency blankets. Everything a backcountry medical responder needs. I've pulled 3 people off those cliffs over the years. Broken bones, heart attacks, 1 snake bite. Real problems with real solutions. That morning started normal: coffee at sunrise, weather check, route planning. The radio crackled with routine reports from other rangers. Nothing unusual. Nothing to make me think this would be the day everything changed. I was loading my pack when Deputy Sheriff Mike Collins pulled up to the station. I went way back. He'd helped me with rescues before. Good man, steady hands. Got something weird, Jonathan, he said, pulling off his hat. Had 3 different hikers come to me this week. All been up to Raven's Roost. All telling the same strange story. What kind of story? They say there's an old woman up there. Lives in a cabin nobody's ever seen before. But here's the weird part. She knows things about them. Personal things. Medical things. One guy swears she told him about a heart problem he didn't even know he had. I laughed. Mike, you know how these mountain stories go. Someone sees an old cabin and starts spinning tales. Probably just someone camping illegally. Maybe. But all 3 described her exactly the same way. Old woman, maybe 80, but moves like she's 40. White hair and braids. Hands stained green from herbs. And they all said the same thing. She offered to help them with problems they never told her about. That got my attention. As a medic, I'd seen plenty of people who thought they could read symptoms that weren't there, usually harmless, but sometimes dangerous if they convinced sick people to avoid real doctors. Sounds like someone's been watching too many movies about mountain witches, I said. But if there's really someone living up there, I should check on them. Could be an elderly person who needs help getting down the mountain. Mike nodded. That's what I was thinking. Welfare check. Make sure they're okay and not bothering hikers. I finished packing my medical supplies. If there really was an old woman living rough on the mountain, she might need medical attention. Elderly people sometimes wandered off from nursing homes or got confused about where they were. I'd handled situations like that before. The hike up to Raven's Roost takes about 2 hours on the main trail. It's steep in places with lots of roots and loose rockin'. The forest gets thicker as you climb, oak and maple giving way to pine and mountain laurel. Usually it's peaceful. That day felt different somehow. The birds were too quiet. I noticed that first. In 13 years of mountain patrols, I'd learned to listen to what the forest was telling me. Too much noise meant animals running from something. No noise at all meant they were hiding. About halfway up, my compass started acting funny. The needle swung around like it couldn't find north. I tapped it a few times, figured maybe I was walking near some iron deposits in the rocks. Mountains can mess with compasses sometimes. But as I got higher, it got worse. The needle kept pointing off to the left, toward a part of the mountain I'd never explored. Just thick laurel bushes and steep slopes. No trails, no clearings, nothing worth checking out. At least, that's what I'd always thought. I reached Raven's Roost around noon. The overlook was empty. No hikers, no campers, just me and the wind. I could see for miles in every direction. The leaves were perfect that day, red and gold spreading across the mountains like fire. Beautiful and normal. I was about to head back down when I smelled something strange. Herbs. Not the wild plants that grew naturally up here, but something else. Something that reminded me of the field hospitals where I'd worked. That sharp, medicinal smell of healing plants. Following my nose, I pushed through a gap in the laurel bushes. The smell got stronger, and there, in a clearing I swear wasn't on any map, stood a cabin. It was old, but well kept. The logs were dark with age, but solid. Smoke rose from the chimney. A garden spread out beside it, full of plants I didn't recognize. Some were flowering, which was impossible. We'd already had 2 frosts. Nothing should have been blooming. I called out, "Hello? Anyone home?" The front door opened, and an old woman stepped out. She matched the description perfectly. White hair and braids, maybe 80 years old, but she moved down the porch steps like someone half her age. Her hands were stight, Ned green, just like the hikers had said. "You must be Ranger Brightwater," she said before I could introduce myself. "I've been expecting you." That stopped me cold. I'd never seen this woman before in my life. "How do you know my name?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Word travels fast in these mountains. You want to come in? You look tired." I was tired, which was weird. The hike up hadn't been that hard, but suddenly I felt like I'd been walking for days. My legs were heavy. My head felt fuzzy. "I'm fine," I said, trying to stay professional. "I'm just checking on reports of someone living up here. Are you camping? Do you have a permit?" "I've lived here longer than there have been permits," she said. "Longer than there have been rangers. My name is Eleanor, but most folks call me Granny Raven. Won't you sit down? You're looking pale." I wasn't pale. I checked my hands. Normal color. But something about her voice made me want to sit down, made me want to rest. "I'm conducting an official check," I said, forcing myself to stay alert. "Can you show me some identification?" Granny Raven laughed. "Child, I don't need identification. I am identification. I know these mountains better than any map. I know every plant, every animal, every person who walks these trails. Including you, Jonathan Brightwater, age 35, former Army medic, moved here after seeing too much death in Vietnam. I never told anyone about Vietnam. Not Mike, not my supervisor, not the few friends I'd made in town." How could she know? "Lucky guess," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. "Is it a lucky guess that you still have nightmares about that helicopter crash outside Saigon? The one where you couldn't save the pilot?" My blood went cold. Nobody knew about that. Nobody. "How do you—" "Or that you came to these mountains because the sound of helicopters makes you panic. And there are no helicopters here." I stepped backward. This wasn't possible. She couldn't know these things. "You have stomach problems," she continued, watching me with those strange eyes. "Ulcers from stress. You take antacids every morning, but they don't really help. Your left shoulder aches when it rains because of shrapnel you never had properly removed." and you haven't slept a full night in 6 years." Every word was true, every single word. "The hikers said you help people with medical problems," I managed to say. "Are you some kind of doctor?" "I'm something much older than doctors," she said. "I know what ails people before they know it themselves. Would you like me to help with those ulcers? With the nightmares? I can make the pain stop, Jonathan. All of it." The smart thing would have been to leave, walk away, radio for backup, report an unstable person living illegally on federal land. But I was so tired, and she was offering to make the pain stop. The pain I carried every single day. "How?" I asked. She smiled again, and this time it did reach her eyes. But there was something hungry in that smile, something that made my skin crawl. "Come inside," she said. "Let me show you." The cabin was bigger inside than it looked from outside. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling. Jars of things I couldn't identify lined the walls. There was a fireplace with a pot bubbling over it, filling the air with that medicinal smell. And there were photographs, dozens of them, scattered across a table. Old photographs, some so faded I could barely make out the faces. But what I could see made my stomach turn. They were all of people looking sick. Thin people, pale people, people with hollow eyes and sunken cheeks, like they were dying. "Who are these people?" I asked. "People I've helped," Granny Raven said. She was behind me now, though I hadn't heard her move. "People who came to me in pain and left feeling better. They looked terrible. They felt wonderful. That's what matters." I picked up one of the photos. A man about my age, but he looked like a skeleton man with skin stretched over it. There was something familiar about his face. "This man," I said. "I think I know him. Tom Henderson. He came to me 2 years ago with cancer. Doctors gave him 6 months to live." "Tom Henderson died last spring," I said. "I remember reading about it in the paper. He lived 2 years longer than the doctors said he would. 2 years feeling no pain, no fear, no worry. I gave him that gift. But he died anyway. Everyone dies anyway, Jonathan. The question is how much they suffer first. I take away the suffering." I looked at more photographs. More sick-looking people with familiar faces. People I'd heard about. People who'd died over the past few years. All of them had lived longer than expected, according to local gossip. All of them had seemed strangely peaceful at the end. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing you haven't already given me," she said. "Just by being here, just by talking to me, you're helping me help others. You're a good man, Jonathan, a healer. Your energy is pure, strong, perfect for what I need." The room started spinning. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself, the photographs scattered to the floor. "What did you do to me?" "I'm helping you," she said. "Just like I helped all the others. You'll feel better soon. So much better." I tried to walk to the door, but my legs wouldn't work right. Everything felt heavy and slow, like I was moving underwater. "You're making me sick," I said. "I'm making you well," she corrected. "You just need to rest now. Let me take care of everything." That's when I realized what was happening. She wasn't healing people. She was draining them, taking something from them to keep herself strong. The people in the photographs hadn't been cured. They'd been slowly killed. And now she was doing the same thing to me. I fought the weakness, forced myself to think like a medic. What were my symptoms? Fatigue, confusion, muscle weakness? Like my blood pressure was dropping, like I was going into shock, but there was no wound, no obvious cause. Just being near this woman was making me sick. "You need to lie down," Granny Raven said. She was moving around the cabin now, gathering herbs, preparing something. "This will be easier if you don't fight it. What are you doing to me? What I do to everyone who comes here hurting. I take their pain and make it my own strength. It's not cruel, Jonathan. It's natural. The strong feed on the weak. The young give life to the old. I've been doing this for a very long time." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something that made my blood freeze. Her eyes weren't the eyes of an 80-year-old woman. They were ancient. Older than the mountains, older than the trees, older than anything human had a right to be. How long? I whispered. I came to these mountains in 1823, she said casually, grinding herbs in a wooden bowl. Young woman then, maybe 20. Learned the old ways from a Cherokee medicine woman before they were all driven west. She taught me how to see into people's bodies, how to find what was wrong with them. But she also taught me something else, something she probably shouldn't have. She paused her grinding and looked at me with those terrible eyes. How to take what I needed to stay young, to stay strong, to stay alive. The math didn't work. If she'd come here in 1823, she'd be over 150 years old now. Impossible. Unless it wasn't. The Cherokee woman, I managed to say. What happened to her? She got old. I stayed young. Simple as that. I tried to stand up, but the room tilted sideways. My vision was getting blurry around the edges. The people in the photos, I said. You killed them. I helped them. They came to me sick and desperate. I gave them months or years without pain. Good months, where they felt strong and healthy and happy. In exchange, they gave me their life force. A fair trade. They didn't know they were trading their lives. Does it matter? They got what they wanted most, relief from suffering, and I got what I needed to help others. It's been working for almost 150 years. She finished grinding whatever was in the bowl and started mixing it with water from a pitcher. The liquid turned dark red like blood. Drink this, she said. It will make the transition easier. I'm not drinking anything you give me. You will, she said simply. Because if you don't, the process will be much more painful, and it will happen either way. I looked around the cabin, trying to find something I could use as a weapon. My service pistol was in my holster, but my hands were shaking too badly to draw it. Everything felt distant and strange. How many people have you killed? I don't kill anyone, she said, sounding genuinely offended. I extend lives. Tom Henderson got 2 extra years with his family. Sarah Mitchell got 8 months to see her granddaughter born. Frank Calloway got a whole year to write his memoirs. I gave them precious time. You stole their futures. I gave them presents. Good days when they should have been suffering. Quality of life instead of quantity. Most people would take that trade if they understood it. She held out the cup of red liquid. It smelled like copper and herbs and something else I didn't want to identify. You're different from the others, though, she said. Stronger, younger. You could give me years instead of months, decades maybe. Think of all the people I could help with that kind of strength. Think of all the people I could help if you didn't murder me. You'll help more people this way, through me. Your life force will heal hundreds of others over the years. It's a beautiful thing, really. The cup was almost at my lips now. I could feel its heat, smell whatever was in it. My body wanted to drink it, wanted to make the weakness stop. But my mind was still working, still fighting. And I remembered something from my medic training. Something about how the human body really worked. You said you learned this from a Cherokee medicine. Woman, I said. Yes. Wise woman. Knew secrets the white doctors never dreamed of. But you killed her to stay young. I learned from her. There's a difference. Is there? Because I'm thinking she might have lied to you about how the process works. Granny Raven paused, the cup halfway to my mouth. What do you mean? In medicine, we have something called a feedback loop. Your body needs certain things to stay healthy. But if you take too much of something, or if you get it the wrong way, it can poison you instead of helping you. The process works. I'm living proof. Are you? Or are you dying just like everyone else, only slower? I was guessing, but I saw something flicker in those ancient eyes. Doubt. Look at yourself, I said. Really look. When was the last time you left these mountains? When was the last time you went more than a few months without needing another victim? You're not immortal. You're addicted. Shut up. That's why you can only live here, in this one spot. That's why you need the garden, the herbs, the specific rituals. You're not a powerful witch. You're a junkie who needs a fix. Shut up. She pressed the cup harder against my lips. Some of the liquid spilled down my chin. It burned like acid. "And that's why you're going to die today," I said. "Because I'm not going to drink that poison and you're too weak to force me." That was a bluff. I was barely conscious, and she was obviously stronger than she looked. But I saw something in her face that gave me hope. She was scared. For the first time in maybe 150 years, someone was refusing to be her victim, and she didn't know what to do about it. Granny Raven set down the cup and stepped back. For just a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw what she really was. Not a wise old healer, not even a powerful witch, just a scared, desperate woman who'd been stealing life from others for so long. She'd forgotten how to live on her own. "You don't understand," she said. "I help people. I take away their pain." "You cause their pain," I said, forcing myself to sit up straighter. "You make them weak so they'll come to you for help. Then you drain them dry." "That's not how it works." "Isn't it? How do people find you, Granny Raven? This cabin isn't on any map. The trail doesn't come here. Yet somehow, sick and desperate people just happen to stumble across your clearing." She didn't answer, but I saw the truth in her face. "You call them," I said. "Somehow you reach out to people who are suffering and make them feel like they need to come here. You're not helping anyone. You're hunting them." "I am helping them!" she screamed. And for the first time, she looked her age, ancient, tired, desperate. "I take away their suffering by killing them, by giving them peace." She lunged at me then, moving faster than any 80-year-old woman should have been able to move. But I was ready. My medical training kicked in, and I rolled sideways off the chair just as her hands reached for my throat. I hit the floor hard, scattering more photographs. As they fell, I saw something I'd missed before. They weren't just pictures of sick people. They were arranged in a circle around the room, like some kind of ritual pattern. "The photographs," I said. "They're part of it, aren't they? You keep pieces of everyone you've killed." "I keep their essence," she said, circling me like a predator. "Their gratitude, their life force. It sustains me between feedings." I crawled toward the door, but she was faster. She grabbed my ankle and pulled, dragging me back into the center of the room. Her grip was impossibly strong. "You can't leave," she said. "No one leaves once they've seen the truth. No one lives to tell others about me. Someone will come looking for me. They'll find you, eventually, peaceful, resting. Another hiker who had a heart attack on the mountain. It happens all the time." She was right. Mike knew I'd come up here, but he wouldn't start worrying until tomorrow at least. By then, I'd be another photograph in her collection, unless I could find a way to break whatever power she had. I looked around the room, trying to think like a medic. If this was some kind of medical condition, there had to be a way to treat it, a way to stop it. The photographs were arranged in a perfect circle. The herbs hanging from the ceiling formed patterns I couldn't quite understand. Even the furniture was positioned in specific ways. Everything in the cabin was part of some larger design. "It's all connected," I said. "The cabin, the garden, the photographs. You need all of it to work, don't you?" "Smart boy," she said. "Too bad smart boys taste the best." She reached for me again, but this time I was ready. I rolled away and grabbed one of the photograph frames, smashing it against the wall. The glass shattered, and the picture fell to the floor. Granny Raven screamed like I'd stabbed her. "The circle," I said. "I have to break the circle." I grabbed another photograph and threw it across the room, then another. Each time she screamed louder, and each time she looked a little older, a little weaker. "Stop," she begged. "You don't know what you're doing." But I did know. I was breaking her connection to all the people she'd killed. I was setting them free. I knocked over chairs, scattered herbs, smashed jars. The cabin began to shake like an earthquake was hitting it. Wind howled through cracks in the walls that hadn't been there before. "Please!" Granny Raven fell to her knees. She was aging rapidly now, her hair going from white to gray to thin and patchy. Her skin was wrinkling like paper. "I'll die without them." "You should have died 150 years ago," I said. I found what looked like the oldest photograph, a faded image of a young Cherokee woman with kind eyes. Granny Raven's first victim, probably. Her teacher, who'd trusted her wit. of ancient knowledge. Don't, Granny Raven whispered. She was barely recognizable now, shrinking in on herself like a deflating balloon. She was like a mother to me. Then you should have honored her, I said, and I tore the photograph in half. The cabin exploded. Not with fire or sound, but with something else. A release of pressure, like opening a door that had been locked for centuries. I felt a rush of wind that carried voices, dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all whispering the same thing. Thank you. When the wind died down, Granny Raven was gone. In her place was a pile of dust and rotted cloth, already scattering in the breeze coming through the now broken windows. The cabin was falling apart around me. The logs were gray and crumbling, the roof was sagging, the floorboards were soft with decay. Whatever power had kept it solid was gone. I stumbled outside just as the whole structure collapsed behind me. Where the herb garden had been, there was nothing but dead weeds and bare earth. My strength came back slowly as I walked away from the ruins. With each step I felt more like myself again. By the time I reached the main trail, I was almost normal. Almost. I radioed in a report about finding an abandoned cabin that had collapsed. Search and rescue came up to check it out, but they found nothing except some old foundation stones and a few scattered pieces of broken glass. No signs that anyone had lived there recently. Mike asked me about the old woman the hikers had described. I told him she must have been someone camping illegally who moved on when she heard rangers were asking questions. It happens sometimes. People who don't want to be found usually don't stick around when authorities start looking for them. He accepted that explanation. It was simpler than the truth. I never reported what really happened up there. Who would believe it? And more importantly, who would it help? Granny Raven was gone. The people she'd killed were at peace. The only thing left to do was make sure it didn't happen again. I started paying more attention to the old stories after that. Not because I believed in magic, but because I realized that sometimes folk tales contain warnings. The Cherokee had stories about creatures that fed on human life force. Mountain families passed down warnings about places where people disappeared. Maybe those stories existed for a reason. I also started studying traditional plant medicine, real medicine, not the twisted version Granny Raven had practiced. There are plants in these mountains that can help with pain, with healing, with a dozen different ailments. The Cherokee woman who taught her had probably been a real healer, someone who used her knowledge to help her people. It was Granny Raven who'd corrupted that knowledge, turned healing into hunting. I learned to make proper willow bark tea for headaches. I learned which mushrooms could help with infections and which berries helped with stomach problems. I learned to respect the old ways while keeping them grounded in real medical knowledge. My ulcers got better. The nightmares didn't stop completely, but they got less frequent. My shoulder still aches when it rains, but not as much as it used to. People sometimes ask me if I ever saw the old woman again. The honest answer is no. Granny Raven is gone for good. But sometimes, when I'm hiking the more remote trails, I catch hints of that medicinal herb smell. Sometimes my compass points toward clearings that aren't on any map. There are other things out there in the deep mountains, other people who learned the wrong lessons from the old knowledge, other predators wearing the faces of healers. I keep an eye out for them. It's part of my job now, though not officially. When hikers report meeting helpful strangers who know too much about their personal problems, I pay attention. When people start talking about miraculous healers who live in hidden cabins, I investigate. So far, I haven't. I found another Granny Raven, but I know they're out there. The mountains are old and they remember things that civilization has forgotten. Some of those things are good, some of them are beautiful, and some of them are hungry. If you ever find yourself hiking in remote mountains and you meet someone who offers to help with problems you never mentioned having, remember this story. Remember that the most dangerous predators don't always look dangerous. Sometimes they look like salvation. Sometimes the person offering to heal you is actually planning to consume you. Trust your instincts. Trust your training. And if someone offers you a cup of red liquid that smells like copper and herbs, don't drink it. Walk away, get to safety, and report what you saw to people who can help. The mountains are beautiful, but they're also wild. And wild places have wild rules that don't always make sense to civilized people. Stay safe out there. And remember, not everyone who claims to be helping you actually has your best interests at heart. My name is Jonathan Brightwater, and I've been keeping these mountains safe for 13 years. That's my job, and I'm good at it. But some threats require more than a first aid kit and a radio to handle. Some threats require you to remember that healing and harming can look exactly the same from the outside. The difference is in the intentions behind them, and sometimes those intentions are a lot older and hungrier than you might expect. My name is Thomas Ravencroft, and I've been a park ranger in these Blue Ridge Mountains for 15 years now. I'm telling you this story because it needs to be told, even though most folks won't believe it. Hell, I wouldn't have believed it myself until it happened to me. I grew up in these mountains. My grandmother used to tell stories about the hollow folk, strange people who lived in the deep places where the sun never reached. She said they weren't quite human anymore, that they'd been changed by living so long in the dark. I always figured it was just old mountain tales, the kind of stories people tell to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. After my family died in the mine collapse back in '48, I came to work for the Park Service. Seemed like the right place for a man who wanted to be left alone. The mountains don't ask questions, don't judge you for the ghosts you carry. They just are. I know these hills like the back of my hand. Every ridge, every hollow, every deer path and water source. I can read weather in the way leaves turn their backs to the sky. I can track a wounded animal through rain and snow. I've pulled lost hikers out of places that would make your blood run cold. And I've never met a problem in these woods I couldn't handle, until October of 1963. It started with 3 hunters who went missing near Devil's Backbone Ridge. The backbone is a narrow spine of rock that runs north to south through some of the roughest country in the park. It's not a place most people go, too steep, too wild, and the old Cherokee maps mark certain hollows there with symbols that mean place of the dead. The hunters were from Richmond, city boys who thought they knew what they were doing. They'd filed their permit properly, marked their intended route on the map. They were supposed to check in by radio every morning at 8. When they missed 2 check-ins, the call came to me. I remember loading my pack that morning, standard search and rescue gear. Rope, first aid kit, emergency blanket, flares. My radio, though I knew it probably wouldn't work once I got deep into the hollows. Something about the rock formations plays hell with radio waves. I brought Rex, my tracking dog, a German shepherd who'd been with me on dozens of rescues. The weather was turning. October in the mountains can be tricky. Warm afternoons that fool you, then snow that comes down like a curtain before you know what hit you. The leaves were mostly down, which would make tracking easier if it came to that. I figured I'd find them with hangovers and empty whiskey bottles, embarrassed about missing their check-ins. It wouldn't be the first time. Rex and I hiked in from the fire road following the hunters' marked route. The first part was easy going. Wide trail, good visibility. But as we got deeper, the forest started to change. The trees grew thicker, blocking out more of the sky. The air felt different somehow, heavier. We found their truck at the trailhead where it should be. Their first camp was set up proper, gear organized the way you'd expect from experienced hunters. But there was something odd about it. Their fire pit was stone cold, like it hadn't been used in weeks, but their food was still fresh. Coffee in the pot was still warm. That's when Rex started acting strange. He kept whining, staying close to my legs instead of ranging ahead like he usually did. His hackles were up, and he kept looking over his shoulder like something was following us. I told myself it was just the weather making him nervous. Dogs can sense pressure changes better than we can. But deep down, I was starting to feel it too. That feeling you get when you're being watched from the shadows. We followed the hunter's trail deeper into Devil's Backbone. Rex stayed close, which wasn't like him at all. Usually he'd be 50 yards ahead, nose to the ground, tail wagging. Now he walked right beside me, pressing against my leg every few steps. The silence was the first thing I really noticed. In 15 years of walking these mountains, I'd never heard quiet like this. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the trees, no wind moving through the leaves. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the forest was swallowing sound. I tried to tell myself it was normal. Sometimes before a storm, animals go quiet. But this felt different. This felt wrong. We came to a fork in the trail. The left path led up the ridge, rocky but manageable. The right path dropped down into a narrow hollow that the Cherokee maps called Shadow Gap. According to the hunter's plan, they'd gone right. Rex took one look at that hollow and sat down hard. He wouldn't budge. I tugged on his leash, called his name, even offered him treats. Nothing. He just stared at me with those brown eyes and whined. "Come on, boy," I said. "They went down there. We have to follow." But Rex backed away from the trail, pulling against his collar. In all our years together, he'd never refused to go anywhere. Dogs who work search and rescue don't have that luxury. They go where the work is, whether they like it or not. I should have listened to him. I tied Rex to a tree at the trail fork and went down alone. The path into Shadow Gap was steep and narrow, with thick rhododendron growing on both sides. The kind of place where you have to push through branches and hope you don't lose the trail. About a quarter-mile down, I found their second camp. It was set up in a small clearing beside a creek. 3 tents arranged in a neat triangle, a fire ring with cold ashes, packs hung properly from bear cables. Everything looked normal except for one thing: the food. They had bacon still sizzling in a cast-iron pan, coffee percolating on the coals, eggs cracked into another pan, still runny, like they'd just stepped away for a minute and would be right back. But the newspaper by the fire was dated 3 weeks ago, and there was frost on the tents, like they'd been sitting empty for days. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice echoed off the hollow walls and died away. No answer. I checked each tent. Sleeping bags laid out, personal items scattered around, but no people. In the third tent, I found something that made my skin crawl. Scratched into the dirt floor were marks, symbols I didn't recognize, arranged in a perfect circle. That's when I noticed the footprints around their camp. Bare feet, but wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow. And they didn't show heel or toe prints like normal tracks. They were just smooth impressions in the dirt, like something had been floating just above the ground. The tracks circled the camp over and over, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Like things had been walking around the tents all night, just watching. I got on the radio, tried to call back to base. Nothing but static. I wasn't surprised. The hollow was deep, with steep walls on all sides. Radio waves don't travel well in places like that. I should have gone back then. Should have climbed out of that hollow and called for more help. But those men were missing, and I had a job to do. I followed the creek deeper into Shadow Gap. The walls got steeper, the canopy thicker. What little sunlight filtered down was gray and weak. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in a few hundred yards, like I was walking into winter. That's when I found the first body. It was Jim Harrison, one of the hunters. I recognized him from his permit photo. He was lying beside the creek, arms folded across his chest like he was sleeping. But Jim Harrison would never sleep again. He looked like he'd aged 50 years. His hair was white as snow, his skin wrinkled and dry as paper. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, and they looked like empty holes in his skull. But her is the thing that still gives me nightmares. He'd only been missing for 2 days, and he was a healthy 30-year-old man when he came into these mountains. I knelt beside the body, looking for signs of what had killed him. No wounds, no blood, no sign of violence. He looked like he'd just laid down and died of old age. My hands were shaking when I tried the radio again. Still nothing. I was on my own in a place where men aged 50 years in 2 days, and somewhere in this hollow were 2 more hunters who might still be alive. That's when I heard the whispers. Soft voices, speaking words I couldn't understand. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the hollow walls. I spun around, looking for the source, but saw nothing except trees and shadows. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. And underneath them, I could swear I heard something else. Footsteps moving through the dry leaves, circling me like the tracks around the camp. I drew my service weapon, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against voices in the wind. "Who's there?" I called. "Show yourself." The whispers stopped. The footsteps stopped. Even the creek seemed to go quiet. Then, In the silence, I saw them. Pale shapes moving between the trees, too tall and thin to be human. They seemed to glide rather than walk, and when I tried to focus on one, it would fade like morning mist. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, they were gone. But the feeling of being watched remained, stronger than ever. I ran back up the hollow faster than I'd ever moved in my life. Rex was waiting where I'd left him, and when he saw me coming, he started barking. Not his normal bark, but something wild and desperate. "Easy, boy," I said, untying his leash with shaking hands. "We're getting out of here." But as we climbed back toward the main trail, I could hear them following us. Whispers in the wind, footsteps in the leaves, and sometimes, just at the edge of my vision, those pale shapes moving through the trees. Rex heard them too. He kept looking back, growling low, in his throat. His fur was standing up all along his spine. When we reached the trail junction, I expected to feel better. Open sky, normal forest sounds, the familiar path back to civilization. But the wrongness followed us. The silence spread like a disease. I was trying to decide what to do next when I heard the radio crackle. "Tom? Tom, you out there?" It was Jake Morrison, my partner. His voice was scratchy with static, but I could make out the words. I keyed the mic. "Jake, thank God, I'm at Devil's Backbone, coordinates." I rattled off the numbers. "I found one of the hunters. He's dead, Jake. Something killed him, but I don't know what." "On my way," Jake's voice came back. 20 minutes out." While I waited, I tried to make sense of what I'd seen. One hunter dead of impossible old age. 2 still missing. Footprints that didn't look human. Pale shapes in the forest that might have been tricks of light. None of it made sense. But I'd seen what I'd seen. Jake arrived right on schedule, hiking up the trail with his usual steady pace. He was a good man, 10 years younger than me, with a wife and 2 kids back in town. We'd worked together for 5 years, and I'd never been happier to see anyone. "Where's the body?" he asked, shouldering his pack. I told him about Shadow Gap, about the camp with the warm food and cold fire, about Jim Harrison lying by the creek looking like an old man. Jake listened without interrupting, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Maybe he had some kind of medical condition," Jake said. "Heart attack, stroke, sometimes that can change how a person looks." "Not like this," I said. "Jake, I'm telling you, something happened down there that doesn't make sense." But Jake was already heading for the hollow trail. "Let's go take a look." Rex refused to follow us again. This time I didn't argue. I tied him to the same tree and told it, him to stay. If something happened to both of us, maybe he'd find his way home. Going back into Shadow Gap was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every instinct I had was screaming at me, to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I couldn't leave Jake to face whatever was down there alone. The hollow felt different the second time. Colder, darker, like it was waking up, paying attention to us now. Jake examined the hunter's camp, taking pictures, making notes. He was thorough, professional, doing everything by the book. But I could see him getting nervous as he worked. The silence was getting to him too. "This is strange," he admitted, looking at the warm bacon in the cold pan. "How long you think this food's been sitting here?" "Minutes," I said. "But look at the newspaper." Jake checked the date, frowned. Maybe they brought old papers with them. 3 weeks old? Come on, Jake. We followed the creek to where I'd found Jim Harrison. The body was still there, but now I could see what I'd missed before. Scratched into the ground around him were more of those symbols. Circles within circles, lines that seemed to twist and move when you looked at them directly. Jake knelt beside the corpse, feeling for a pulse he knew wasn't there. "Jesus," he whispered. "What happened to him?" "That's what I've been trying to tell you." Jake checked his watch, then looked puzzled. "Tom, what time do you have?" I looked at my watch. The hands were frozen at 2:15. Damn thing stopped working when I came down here the first time. Mine says 4:30, but we just got here 20 minutes ago. We stared at each other. Time didn't work right in Shadow Gap. That's when we heard the scream. It came from deeper in the hollow, echoing off the walls like the cry of something in terrible pain. Human, but not quite. Like someone screaming through a throat that was changing, becoming something else. "That's got to be one of the other hunters," Jake said, drawing his weapon. "Come on." We followed the creek into the narrowest part of the hollow, where the walls rose, up on both sides like the jaws of some great beast. The scream came again, closer now, filled with an agony that made my bones ache. We found the source in a small cave mouth, hidden behind a curtain of dead vines. The second hunter, Bill Kowalski, was lying just inside the entrance. But he wasn't dead like Jim Harrison. He was changing. His skin was pale as moonlight, stretched tight over bones that looked too long. His fingers had grown into claws, and when he saw us, his eyes were completely black. No white, no iris, just darkness. "Help me," he whispered, and his voice was like wind through dry leaves. "Something's happening to me. I can't stop it." Jake took a step forward, reaching out to help. "Don't!" I grabbed his arm. Something about Bill's condition warned me that touching him would be a very bad idea. But I was too late. Jake's fingertips brushed Bill's outstretched hand. The change in Jake was immediate. Color drained from his face, and his hair began to show streaks of gray. He staggered backward, looking at his hands in horror as the skin began to wrinkle. "What's happening to me?" Jake gasped. Bill smiled, and his teeth were sharp as needles. "They're hungry," he whispered. "The hollow folk. They've been waiting so long for fresh life to come to them." That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. The pale shapes I'd glimpsed before stepped out of the shadows, surrounding us. They were tall, 8 feet at least, and thin as scarecrows. Their skin was translucent, showing the dark veins underneath. Their eyes were holes in their faces, empty as night, and they were reaching for us with fingers that looked like white bone. The hollow folk moved like smoke, flowing around us in a circle. Up close, I could see they had once been human. Their faces held echoes of what they used to be. A woman's cheekbones here, a man's jaw there. But whatever they were now, humanity was just a memory. Jake was aging before my eyes. His brown hair turned white, his face creased with lines that deepened by the second. He looked at his hands, watched. His skin grew spotted and thin. "Tom," he said, and his voice cracked like an old man's. "What's happening to me?" One of the creatures spoke, its voice like wind through empty houses. "We were like you once, lost in these mountains, changed by the deep places, by hunger that never ends." I remembered my grandmother's stories. People who got lost in the hollows, who came back different, if they came back at all. "The Cherokee knew," another creature whispered. "They marked this place as forbidden, but white men don't listen to warnings." Bill Kowalski was sitting up now, his transformation nearly complete. His skin had the same pale, translucent quality as the others. "It doesn't hurt after a while," he said. "You just get so hungry. Hungry for warmth, for life, for the thing that makes people real." Jake stumbled toward me, reaching out. "Tom, help me. I can feel it happening. I can feel myself disappearing." But I backed away. I'd seen what happened when these things touched you. Whatever curse lived in Shadow Gap, it spread through contact. The hollow folk were closing in, their bone-white fingers extended. I could feel the cold coming off them like they were made of winter itself. That's when I remembered something else from my grandmother's stories. The Cherokee had ways to protect themselves from the hollow folk. Old words, old rituals that could turn away the things that fed on life. I pulled out my pocket knife and cut my palm, letting the blood drop onto the ground. Then I spoke the words my grandmother had taught me, words I'd thought were just part of her stories. "Spirits of the earth, spirits of the stone, hear me. This blood is freely given. By the old laws, by the first laws, I claim protection for the living." The creatures stopped, hissing like steam from a kettle. They couldn't cross the line where my blood had fallen. "Old words," one of them said. "Old power, but it will not last long, and you cannot stay here forever." They were right. Already I could feel the protection weakening. The blood was soaking into the earth, and with it went my only defense. Jake had collapsed, his breathing shallow and rapid. He looked like he was 90 years old, his body worn down to nothing. "Get out of here," he whispered. "Don't let them take you too." But I couldn't leave him. Not like this. I grabbed Jake under his arms and dragged him toward the cave entrance. The hollow folk followed, staying just outside the circle of protection, waiting for it to fail. "Tell me how to stop this," I said to Bill. "Tell me how to save him." Bill laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You can't. Once we touch you, you're ours. The only choice is how long it takes." But as he spoke, I noticed something. Bill was staying away from the blood circle too. Whatever protected me from the hollow folk also worked on him. "That's not true," I said. "You're afraid of the old protections just like they are. You're not one of them yet." For just a moment, Bill's black eyes flickered, and I saw something human underneath. Fear, regret, the part of him that was still Bill Kowalski and didn't want to become a monster. "The third hunter," I said. "Where is he?" Bill pointed deeper into the cave. "Martin's in the feeding chamber. They're saving him for last, drawing out his life slowly. They like to savor it." The protection was almost gone now. I could feel it fading like heat from a dying fire. In minutes, maybe less, the hollow folk would be free to take us. I made a decision that probably saved my life and definitely damned my soul. I grabbed a burning branch from the hunter's abandoned fire and threw it at Bill. He screamed as the flames caught his changing flesh, but the fire spread faster than he could move. The hollow folk shrieked and scattered as Bill burned. In the confusion, I dragged Jake out of the cave and into the creek. The running water seemed to slow his aging, buying us precious minutes. But Jake was dying. I could see it in his eyes, not just his body failing, but something deeper. His life force, his soul maybe, was being drained away. "Leave me," he gasped. "Save yourself. Tell Sarah. Tell my kids." I wanted to argue, to fight, to find some way to bring him back, but Jake was right. Every second I stayed put us both in more danger. I said a prayer over Jake Morrison, a good man who died trying to save people he'd never met. Then I ran. I don't remember much about getting out of Shadow Gap. I ran through that hollow like the devil himself was chasing me, and maybe he was. Behind me, I could hear them coming, the whispers, the footsteps, the sound of hunger that's waited too long to feed. Rex was still tied where I'd left him, and when he saw me coming, he nearly pulled the tree down trying to get free. We ran together back toward the main trail, and it wasn't until we reached the fire road that I felt safe enough to stop. I called it in on the radio as a gas leak, told them the hunters had died from exposure to natural gas seeping from a cave. It was the only explanation that wouldn't get me committed to a mental hospital. The official report listed 3 deaths by misadventure. The cave mouth was sealed with concrete, and Shadow Gap was marked as a geological hazard zone. No one goes down there anymore, at least not officially. But the hollow folk didn't die when I sealed their cave. How do you kill something that was already dead? They just found other ways to move through the mountain, other caves, other dark places where the sun never reaches. I see them sometimes when I'm out on patrol. Pale shapes watching from the tree line, just beyond the edge of my vision. They remember me, and they're patient. They know that someday I'll be alone and vulnerable, and when that day comes, they'll finish what they started in Shadow Gap. The encounter changed me. My hair went gray, within a month, and I aged 10 years in the space of that autumn. People said it was the stress of losing Jake, and I let them think that. It was easier than explaining about things that shouldn't exist. I retired early and moved away from Devil's Backbone, but you can't run from some things. The hollow folk are still out there, still hungry, still waiting for the next group of hunters or hikers to wander into their territory. So I'm telling you this story as a warning. There are places in these mountains that are empty for good reason, places where the Cherokee put warning signs that we ignore at our peril. If you're ever hiking in the Blue Ridge and you come to a hollow that's too quiet, where your dog won't go and your compass spins like a top, turn around and walk away. Some silences are meant to be respected. And if you ever find yourself in Shadow Gap, despite all warnings and common sense, remember what I learned too late. Don't touch them, don't trust them, and don't believe for a second that they were ever really human. Because the hollow folk are always hungry, and they remember the taste of life from when they had it themselves. They'll do anything to get that feeling back, even if it means draining the years from your body and the soul from your bones. Jake Morrison was a good man with a wife and kids who needed him. He died because I didn't listen to my grandmother's warnings, because I thought mountain folklore was just stories told around campfires. Now I know better. Now I know that some stories are told to keep people alive. Listen to them. My name is Michael Ironbear, and I used to think I knew everything about the creatures living in these mountains. For 11 years, I worked as a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest. Not just any ranger. I had a PhD in zoology and spent most of my time studying black bear behavior in the wild. I knew their tracks, their calls, their mating patterns. I could tell you which berries they preferred in spring and how they marked their territory. People would come to me with stories. Wild stories about giant creatures walking on two legs through the forest. They'd show me blurry photos and plaster casts of footprints. They'd whisper about the old Seneca legends of forest giants that lived in the deep woods. I'd smile politely and explain the truth. What they saw was just a black bear standing up on its back legs. The footprints were hoaxes or maybe just regular bear prints that got washed out by rain. The legends were just stories people told around campfires to scare each other. Bigfoot is just bad science, I'd tell them. People see what they want to see. I was so sure of myself back then, so confident in my education and my research. I had published 3 papers on Appalachian wildlife behavior. I thought science could explain everything. The Black Rock Gorge area was my favorite place to study. 20 miles from the nearest town, you could only get there on foot. The gorge cut deep into the mountain, with waterfalls dropping down limestone cliffs and caves that went back into the rock for miles. Old-growth trees grew so thick that sunlight barely touched the ground. It was the kind of place that felt ancient, like it had been the same for thousands of years. The Seneca people used to hunt there before the white settlers came. Local folks still talked about how strange things happened in that gorge. Hunters would get lost even with compasses. Dogs wouldn't go, past a certain point. Some years, 3 or 4 people would just disappear without a trace. I figured it was just because the terrain was dangerous, easy to fall off a cliff or get turned around in the thick woods. Nothing supernatural about it. It was early spring of 1978 when everything changed. The snow had just melted, and all the animals were starting to move around more, looking for mates and food. I was planning another research trip to study how the bears were coming out of hibernation. That's when Joe Hendricks from the logging company called me. "Mike, we got a problem up near Black Rock," he said over the crackling radio. His voice sounded shaky, which was weird because Joe had been working these mountains for 20 years. "Lost 3 of my boys yesterday. Found what's left of Tom Morrison this morning." "What happened?" I asked. "Bear attack?" That's what I thought at first, but Mike, this wasn't no regular bear. Thing had to be bigger than a grizzly, and the way Tom was arranged. Bears don't do that. I packed my gear that same day. Tranquilizer gun, camera equipment, specimen collection kit. I figured it was probably a sick bear, maybe rabid or defending cubs. I'd seen aggressive bears before, shot a few with tranquilizers when they got too close to campers. But as I hiked into the gorge that first day, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. I'd been walking these trails for years, and there were always sounds. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. Something was always moving in the underbrush. Not that day. The only sound was my own footsteps on the muddy trail. Even weirder, I couldn't find any tracks. In spring mud, you should see prints everywhere. Deer, raccoons, bears, even mice. But the trail looked like nothing had walked on it for weeks. I made camp about a mile from where they'd found Tom's body, planning to investigate in the morning when the light was better. As the sun went down, the silence got even thicker. No owl calls, no rustling in the trees. Nothing. I've spent hundreds of nights alone in the wilderness, but I'd never felt anything like this before. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I should have left right then. I found the footprint at dawn. It was pressed deep into the mud beside a stream, about 50 yards from Tom Morrison's body. At first glance, it looked like a bear print, but wrong, all wrong. 22 inches long. A bear's back paw is maybe 8 inches. This thing had 5 toes like a human, but wider and longer. And there was something else that made my hands shake as I measured it. The thumb. Bears don't have thumbs. I took pictures from every angle, made a plaster cast, measured the depth. The creature that made this print had to weigh at least 800 pounds, maybe more. It was walking upright, putting its full weight on 2 feet. Genetic mutation, I told myself. Maybe a bear born with deformed feet. But even as I said it, I knew that was stupid. No mutation could change a bear's bone structure this much. I followed the prints upstream. They were spaced about 4 feet apart, longer strides than any bear could make. The tracks led to a cluster of oak trees where I found something that made me forget about scientific explanations. Territorial markings. Deep claw marks gouged into the bark 8 feet off the ground. But these weren't random scratches. They formed patterns, almost like symbols. And the smell. God, the smell was like nothing I'd ever encountered. Musky and wild, but also somehow intelligent. It made the hair on my arms stand up. I was taking pictures when I heard the tree crack. Not break, crack. Like someone was bending a living tree trunk until the wood started to split. The sound came from about 100 yards away, deeper in the forest. I grabbed my tranquilizer rifle and headed toward the noise. What I found there changed everything. A massive oak tree, 3 feet thick at the base, broken in half about 15 feet up. The top half was lying across the trail, blocking the path. But trees don't just snap in half on calm days. And when I looked closer, I could see hand marks pressed into the bark, finger impressions bigger than my whole hand. Something had grabbed that tree and broken it like a twig. I was still staring at the broken tree when I smelled it again. That wild, musky scent, but stronger now. Much stronger. The forest went completely silent. Every animal instinct I had started screaming at me to run. But I'm a scientist. I needed evidence. I raised my camera and started shooting pictures. That's when I saw the eyes. 2 yellow points of light, watching me from the shadows about 30 yards away. They were at least 8 feet off the ground, maybe more. Too high to be a bear, too wide set to be human. I lowered my camera and tried to focus on the dark space between the trees. The eyes didn't move. They just watched me with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. Easy, I whispered, not sure if I was talking to the creature or myself. I slowly reached for my tranquilizer gun. The eyes blinked once. Then they were gone. Not like an animal running away. They just disappeared. Like someone had turned off a light. I stood there for 10 minutes, sweating and shaking, waiting for something to happen. But the forest stayed empty and quiet. When I finally made it back to my camp that evening, I found my tent torn open. Not by claws, by hands. My equipment was scattered around the campsite, but nothing was missing. My camera was sitting on a log with the film door hanging open. 3 rolls of film, all exposed to light. Ruined. But here's the thing that really scared me. Whoever did this had been careful. My food was untouched. My sleeping bag was folded neatly beside the torn tent. Even my notebook was placed carefully on a flat rock held down by a stone so it wouldn't blow away. Something intelligent had gone through my camp. Something that understood what cameras were for. I should have hiked out that night. Should have called for backup, maybe brought in a whole research team. Instead, I radioed my partner, Dr. Helen Morrison, at the university. Helen, I need you to bring the audio recording equipment up to Black Rock, and bring it fast. What did you find, Mike? I looked at the destroyed film canisters, thought about those yellow eyes watching me from the forest. I'm not sure yet, but I think we're going to need proof that people will believe. Helen arrived the next morning with a van full of equipment. Parabolic microphones, night vision cameras, motion sensors, everything we'd need to document a large predator. You look like hell, she said when she saw me. When's the last time you slept? Something's been circling my camp all night, I told her. I keep hearing footsteps, but they stop whenever I turn on my flashlight. Helen was younger than me, fresh out of graduate school, but she was smart and fearless. She'd spent 2 summers tracking wolves in Alaska. If anyone could help me figure out what was happening in these woods, it was her. We spent the morning setting up equipment around the area where I'd found the footprints. Motion-activated cameras, audio recorders that could pick up sounds below human hearing range, even some infrared sensors. If there's a large animal using this territory, we'll get evidence, Helen said. By afternoon, we were picking up sounds, deep, rumbling calls that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The frequency was so low I could feel them in my chest more than hear them with my ears. Helen's equipment showed they were infrasonic, below the range of human hearing. Bears can't make sounds like this, Helen said, staring at the readouts. This is more like elephant communication. But the volume. Mike, whatever's making these sounds has to have a chest cavity the size of a barrel. The calls came in patterns, through. Long rumbles, pause, 2 short ones, pause, then a rising tone that made my bones ache. It sounded almost like language. It's talking, Helen whispered. It's actually talking to something. That's when we heard the answer. Another voice, higher pitched, coming from the opposite direction. Then a third voice, deeper than both. The sounds bounced off the cliffs around the gorge like some kind of prehistoric conversation. There's more than one, I said. Helen was already packing up the equipment. We need to get out of here, Mike, right now. But it was too late. Jerry Kowalski from the logging crew came crashing through the underbrush, his face white with terror. They got Dave, he gasped. They got Dave and they took him into the caves. We followed Jerry's trail back toward the logging site. What we found there made me understand why the Seneca people had stayed away from this place. Dave's body was hanging from a tree branch 20 feet off the ground, not thrown up there, placed. His arms were positioned in a specific way, almost like he was reaching toward something, and around the base of the tree, rocks had been arranged in a perfect circle. This is a message, Helen said quietly. They're telling us this is their territory. That night, they came for our equipment. We were camped about half a mile from where we'd found Dave, taking turns on watch. Helen had the first shift. I was trying to sleep when I heard her scream. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag to find the campsite in chaos. Our recording equipment was smashed to pieces. The cameras were torn apart, their circuits scattered around like someone had taken them apart to see how they worked. Helen was sitting on the ground, bleeding from a cut on her forehead. I saw it, she said. I saw it, Mike. What? What did you see? 12 feet tall, walking on 2 legs like a man but covered in dark hair. At the smell, God, the smell was incredible. And the way it moved, it wasn't like any animal. It was thinking, planning. It knew exactly what to destroy. Did it hurt you? That's the weird part. I was right here when it went through our gear. It could have killed me without even trying, but it just looked at me, like it was trying to decide what to do. Then it pointed toward the trail, like it was telling me to leave. Helen was a trained scientist, not someone who jumped to wild conclusions. If she said she saw a 12-foot creature that communicated through gestures, I believed her. But we stayed anyway. We were so close to proof, to documentation that would change everything science thought about North American wildlife. That was our mistake. They attacked our camp the next night. Not one creature, at least 3 of them, moving through the forest like shadows. I woke up to Helen screaming and the sound of our remaining equipment being destroyed. In the chaos, I caught glimpses of them, massive shapes moving between the trees, coordinating their attack like a military unit. One would distract us, while another flanked around behind. I managed to get a few shots off with my tranquilizer gun, but I don't think I hit anything. These creatures moved too fast, too smart. Helen was trying to save her research notes when the biggest one came for her. I'll never forget the sound she made when it grabbed her. Not a scream, more like surprise, like she couldn't believe what was happening. By the time I got my flashlight turned toward her, she was gone. I found pieces of her notebook scattered around a tree 50 yards away, pages covered in her careful handwriting about infrasonic communication and territorial behavior. Some of the pages had what looked like replies written in the margins, symbols pressed into the paper with a claw or stick. They had been reading her research, responding to it. I was alone in the forest with creatures that were not only intelligent but curious about human science. I should have run. Any sane person would have run. Instead, I did something that probably saved my life. I stopped trying to study them and started trying to communicate, using Helen's notes about infrasonic communication. I tried to make the same kind of sounds I'd been hearing, deep rumbling calls that I could barely produce with my throat. The forest went quiet. Then, from about 100 yards away, came an answer. 3 low rumbles, just like the pattern I'd attempted. They were listening. Over the next hour, we had what I can only describe as a conversation. I would make a sound, and something in the forest would respond. Gradually, the responses got closer. Finally, just as the sun was coming up, I saw her, the matriarch. She stepped out from behind a massive pine tree like she was walking through a doorway. 12 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair that was almost black. Her face was more human than ape, with intelligent brown eyes that studied me with the same curiosity I'd been showing toward her family. She was beautiful. Terrifying, but beautiful. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Then she sat down on her haunches, bringing her face closer to my level. She tilted her head and made a soft rumbling sound, almost like a question. I realized she was trying not to scare me. "My friend," I said quietly, pointing toward where Helen had disappeared. "Where is my friend?" The matriarch's expression changed. She looked sad. She made a low sound, almost like mourning, then pointed deeper into the forest. "Is she alive?" A slow shake of the head. I felt tears running down my cheeks. Helen had been more than a research partner. We'd been planning to get married after she finished her dissertation. The matriarch must have understood my grief. She reached out one massive hand and gently touched my shoulder. Her fingers were gentle, careful not to hurt me. Then she started to move away, stopping to look back at me. She wanted me to follow. I followed her through the forest for almost an hour, past places I'd never seen before. Ancient caves marked with symbols carved into the rock. Areas where the trees grew in perfect circles like they'd been planted that way. This wasn't just their territory. It was their home, as organized and intentional as any human settlement. She led me to a cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall. Inside, I could see the glow of some kind of fire. The matriarch called out in her deep voice, and 2 smaller figures appeared at the cave mouth. A male, almost as tall as she was, and what had to be a juvenile, maybe 8 feet tall, but moving with the energy of a child. A family. The male approached me cautiously, making questioning sounds toward the matriarch. She responded in their rumbling language, and I could hear my name being repeated. Mike L. Iron Bear. They had learned my name from listening to Helen and me talk. Then the male pointed toward a pile of stones near the cave entrance. Helen's body lay there, covered with pine branches and wildflowers. They had prepared her for burial according to some ritual I didn't understand. "She was trying to protect her papers," I said, not caring if they understood the words. "She died trying to document your existence." The matriarch made a sound I can only describe as regret. Then she walked to Helen's body and placed something beside her. Helen's research notebook, intact and carefully preserved. They understood what she had been trying to do. They understood the value of knowledge. The male Sasquatch approached me then, and I realized he was the one who had been destroying our equipment. But now he was offering me something. Helen's camera, unbroken, with a roll of film still inside. "You want us to tell your story?" I whispered. The matriarch nodded. But then she pointed toward the forest behind us, where the sound of helicopters was growing louder. The logging company had called in search and rescue when we missed our radio check. The family group was in danger. If the authorities found them, they would become specimens, test subjects. Their peaceful life in these ancient mountains would be over. I had to choose. Document the greatest zoological discovery in history, or protect a family that had shown me more kindness than I deserved. I opened the camera and exposed the film to sunlight. The matriarch watched me destroy the evidence, then placed both hands on my shoulders. She made a sound that I somehow understood meant, "Thank you." The helicopters were getting closer. The matriarch pushed me gently toward the trail that led back to the logging camp. I started walking, then looked back once. The cave entrance was empty. The family had vanished like they were never there. The official report said that Helen and I had been attacked by a rogue black bear. Helen's body was never recovered, carried off and consumed, according to the Forest Service investigators. I backed up their story, described a massive black bear, maybe 600 pounds, that had stalked us for days before attacking our camp. I even led them to the broken tree, explaining that the bear must have been marking territory. The logging operation was shut down. The entire Black Rock Gorge area was declared an environmental protection zone, off limits to commercial development. I made sure of that. I quit the Forest Service 6 months later, started my own research company specializing in cryptid investigations. I travel around the country now, interviewing people who claim to have encountered things that science says don't exist. Most of the time, they're mistaken or lying. But sometimes they're telling the truth. I still go back to Black Rock Gorge twice a year, always alone, always careful not to bring any recording equipment or cameras. Sometimes I find gifts waiting for me at the cave entrance. Carved pieces of wood, interesting stones, once a collection, and of rare medicinal plants I'd been looking for to help with my arthritis. They remember me. They know I kept their secret. Last spring I saw the juvenile again. He's grown, probably 10 feet tall now, but still moving with that playful energy. He watched me from across the gorge, then raised one massive hand in what looked like a wave. I waved back. People ask me why I gave up a successful academic career to chase after monsters and ghost stories. They think I had some kind of breakdown after Helen died. Maybe I did. But I learned something in those mountains that no university ever taught me. Some species survived by staying hidden. For thousands of years, they watched us cut down forests, build cities, turn wild places into parking lots. They learned to avoid us, to move through our world without being seen. But now we're running out of wild places. They're running out of room to hide. The Sasquatch family in Black Rock Gorge made a choice to trust one human being with their existence. They chose protection over proof, secrecy over science. I pray I was worthy of that trust, but I also know that someday someone else is going to stumble into their territory with cameras and recording equipment. Someone who won't make the same choice I did. When that happens, the family will have to choose between hiding and defending their home. I've seen what they can do when they feel threatened. I hope for all our sakes that day never comes. But if you're planning to go hiking in the deep woods of West Virginia, let me give you some advice. If the forest goes completely quiet, if you find footprints bigger than any animal you know, if you smell something wild and ancient on the wind, turn around, go home. Some secrets are worth keeping. My name is William Deadwood, and I've been a forest ranger for 21 years. That makes me the oldest active ranger in this district of the Daniel Boone National Forest here in eastern Kentucky. I'm 48 years old, third-generation Appalachian, and I've seen things that would make most folks wet themselves. But those things happened in the Pacific during the war, not in these mountains. See, I don't believe in ghost stories. War taught me what real horror looks like. Watching your buddy step on a mine, seeing a man burn alive in a tank, holding someone's hand while they die calling for their mama. Mountain spook stories are just campfire nonsense compared to that. I specialize in forest disease control and timber assessment. Been doing it so long I can tell you what's wrong with a tree just by looking at its leaves. Dutch elm disease, oak wilt, pine beetle. I know them all. The forest speaks to me in ways most people don't understand. A brown patch here, a strange smell there, birds avoiding certain areas. It's all data. That's why what happened on Panther Mountain Ridge in late summer of 1957 still keeps me up at night. Because everything I knew about trees, everything I learned in 21 years of service, couldn't explain what I saw. It started during the worst drought we'd had in decades. The fire danger was so high we'd closed half the trails. I was stationed at the remote fire tower, 25 miles from the nearest settlement, checking on a grove of ancient oaks that had been in these mountains since before the Cherokee walked the Trail of Tears. The locals had always whispered about those trees. Old Cherokee execution ground, they said. Place where the tribe dealt with their worst criminals before the government forced them west. But I never paid attention to such talk. Trees are trees. They grow, they get sick, they die. That's nature. But when I hiked up to that grove on August 15th, something was wrong. Dead wrong. All 12 of the ancient oaks, trees that had stood for maybe 300 years, were dying at the same time. Every single one. Their leaves were turning brown from the inside out, curling up like they were being burned by an invisible fire. I'd never seen anything like it. These trees had survived droughts, floods, ice storms, even a tornado back in '34. Now they were all dying together, and I couldn't find any sign of disease. No bark beetles, no fungus, no root rot. The soil samples I took looked normal, but something was killing them from the inside, and it was happening fast. That first day, I set up my equipment and started my standard assessment. Temperature readings, soil pH tests, bark samples. Everything looked normal on paper, but the forest felt wrong. Too quiet. Even the wind seemed afraid to blow through those dying branches. When I got back to the tower that evening, I radioed headquarters and requested a second opinion. They said they'd send young Bobby Hillcrest up to assist. Bobby was fresh out of forestry school, full of new ideas and modern equipment. Maybe he could spot something I'd missed. I spent that night going over my notes, trying to find a pattern. But every time I looked out the tower window toward that grove, I felt a chill run down my spine. The trees looked different in the moonlight, almost like they were watching me back. Bobby arrived the next morning with a camera and some new testing equipment I'd never seen before. Kid was eager to prove himself, talking about soil chemistry and environmental factors while we hiked up to the grove. "Maybe it's underground contamination," he said, adjusting his brand-new ranger hat. "Chemical runoff from old mining operations. These mountains are full of abandoned sites." I liked his thinking, but something felt off the mom. Yet we entered the grove. The temperature dropped at least 10 degrees, even though we were in full sunlight. And the smell, Christ, the smell was like something rotting mixed with burned metal. "You smell that?" I asked Bobby. He wrinkled his nose. "Smells like someone's been burning hair." We set up our equipment beneath the largest oak, a massive tree that had to be 15 feet around at the base. Its bark was starting to split open in long vertical lines, and when I got close to examine it, I could swear I heard something, whispering. "Bobby, come listen to this." He put his ear to the bark where I was pointing. His face went white as snow. That's not possible," he said, backing away. But we both heard it. Voices, faint, but definitely human voices, coming from inside the tree. I tried to rationalize it. Wind through hollow spaces in the trunk, air pressure changes, something. But when Bobby started taking pictures, things got worse. "Mr. Deadwood," he called from across the grove, "look at this." He was standing near another dying oak, pointing at the bark. I walked over and nearly dropped my clipboard. There, burned into the trunk about 6 feet off the ground, was the perfect outline of a human body. Arms spread wide, head thrown back like someone screaming. "Could be lightning," I said, but I didn't believe it. Lightning doesn't leave human-shaped marks. We found similar marks on 7 other trees, all at the same height. all showing people in positions of agony. Bobby snapped pictures of everything. "Whatever caused this happened a long time ago," he said, trying to sound scientific. "Look how the bark has grown around the edges." He was right. The marks were old, ancient maybe, but the trees were dying now. Why now? That's when we heard the first scream. It came from above us, from the leaves themselves, a long, piercing shriek that sounded exactly like a human voice in terrible pain. We both looked up, and the leaves on the massive oak were moving, not swaying in wind, but writhing like they were alive. "Jesus Christ, Bo," Bibby whispered. Another scream, this time from our left, then our right. Soon all the dying trees were screaming, their leaves twisting and writhing while those horrible human voices poured out of them. I grabbed Bobby's arm. "We're leaving. Now." But as we turned to go, Bobby stopped dead. "Look," he said, pointing toward the trail. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, was walking toward us between the trees. She was moving strangely, like she was sleepwalking, and she was heading straight for the largest oak. "Hey!" I shouted. "Little girl, stop, don't come any closer." She didn't respond, just kept walking with that strange mechanical gait. I ran toward her, but something was wrong with the distance. No matter how fast I moved, she seemed to stay the same distance away. Bobby was right behind me, and I could hear his camera clicking as he tried to document everything. But when we finally reached the spot where she'd been, there was no little girl. Just a small depression in the ground, shaped exactly like a child's body. "She was right here," Bobby said, his voice shaking. "I saw her. I took pictures." We looked around frantically, but she was gone. The screaming from the trees had stopped too, leaving us in that terrible silence again. That evening, back at the fire tower, Bobby developed his photographs. When he called me over to look, we both stared in shock at what the camera had captured. In every single picture of the trees, there were faces. Human faces, twisted in agony, visible in the patterns of the bark. And in the photo he'd taken of the little girl, she appeared translucent, like she was made of smoke. But worst of all, in the picture of the largest oak, we could see dozens of faces pressed against the inside of the bark, mouths open in silent screams, trying to push their way out. We should have left then, should have radioed for backup, called in Speron. Eshalists, done anything except go back to that grove. But we were forest rangers. It was our job to understand what was happening to those trees. The next morning brought news that made my blood run cold. A local farm family, the Hendersons, had called the sheriff. Their 8-year-old daughter Emma had gone missing during the night. They'd found her bedroom window open and tiny bare footprints leading toward Panther Mountain. "We have to find her," Bobby said when I told him the news. I knew where she'd gone, same place the little girl in our photographs had been heading, but I also knew we weren't dealing with anything natural anymore. We packed emergency gear, ropes, first aid, flares, and hiked back up to the grove. The screaming started the moment we entered the tree line, but this time it was different. Louder, more urgent, like the trees knew we were coming. We found Emma at the base of the largest oak, unconscious but breathing. Her small body was pressed against the trunk, and pieces of bark had somehow grown into her skin, forming strange patterns across her arms and face. "How is this possible?" Bobby whispered as we carefully pulled bark fragments from her skin. Each piece came away with a soft tearing sound, like we were peeling it off a living person. Emma's eyes fluttered open while we worked, but when she looked at us, her pupils were the color of tree sap, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "They're so cold," she said. "They've been cold for so long. They want to be warm again." Then she pointed at the tree behind us. "They want to come home." I turned around and nearly screamed myself. The human-shaped burn marks on the bark were moving, writhing like living things trapped beneath the surface. And the faces Bobby had photographed. We could see them now with our naked eyes, pressing against the inside of the bark, trying to break through. "We need to get her out of here," I said, scooping Emma into my arms. But as we tried to leave the grove, the trees themselves seemed to fight us. Branches reached down to block our path, roots pushed up through the ground to trip us, and the screaming got so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. Bobby was behind me, camera around his neck, when one of the oak branches swept down and wrapped around his waist like an arm. He screamed as it lifted him off the ground, pulling him toward the trunk. I set Emma down and grabbed my axe. The branch holding Bobby was thick as my thigh, but I started chopping at it with everything I had. Black sap poured out instead of normal tree sap, and the screaming from the leaves got even worse. "Don't let it touch the tree," Bobby yelled. "I can see them inside. They're trying to pull me in." I could see them too now. The faces in the bark were reaching through, ghostly hands stretching out to grab Bobby and drag him inside. I chopped harder, and finally the branch broke. Bobby fell hard, but got up running. We grabbed Emma and ran. Behind us, all 12 trees were moving now, their massive trunks creaking and groaning as they swayed without any wind. The faces in the bark were clearer than ever. Men, women, children, all twisted in agony, all trying to escape their wooden prisons. We made it back to the fire tower, but Emma stayed unconscious for 2 days. When she finally woke up, she couldn't remember anything except the cold. She kept saying how cold they were, how they'd been cold for so long. The doctor who examined her found pieces of bark embedded so deep in her skin that surgery couldn't remove them all. They were growing, he said. Actually growing, like they were part of her now. That night, I called my old Cherokee friend, Joseph Crowfeather. If anyone would know the real story behind that grove, it would be him. "You shouldn't have gone up there, William," he said when I described what we'd seen. "That's a sacred place, sacred and cursed." He told me the truth about those trees, how his aunts, Stores had used that grove to execute their worst criminals, murderers, child killers, those who betrayed the tribe. They would tie them to the oaks and leave them to die slowly, believing their spirits would be trapped in the trees as punishment. But something went wrong, Joseph said. The spirits didn't move on like they should have. They got trapped, and over the years they got hungry. Hungry for life, for warmth, for the chance to escape their wooden prison. The drought, I said, understanding. It weakened something. The barrier between their world and ours. When the trees started dying, the spirits got stronger. They can reach out now, pull living people in to take their place. I looked out toward the grove, invisible in the darkness, but somehow still watching us. How do we stop them? Joseph was quiet for a long time. Fire, he finally said. It's the only way to set them free. But William, some of those spirits have been trapped for over a century. They're not human anymore. They're just pain and hunger. Burning those trees won't be easy. They'll fight back. The next morning, I made a decision that still haunts me. I was going to burn that grove. All of it. It was the only way to stop whatever was happening up there. Bobby volunteered to help, even though his encounter with the tree had left him with bark-like scars across his chest. Those things almost got me, he said. We can't let them get anyone else. We loaded up with gasoline, flares, and every piece of firefighting equipment we had. If we were going to burn sacred ground, we were going to do it right and make sure it didn't spread to the rest of the forest. The hike up to the grove felt like walking to our own execution. The trees knew we were coming. We could feel their attention like a physical weight. The air grew colder with every step, and by the time we reached the edge of the grove, our breath was visible, even though it was 90 degrees outside. The 12 ancient oaks had changed overnight. The bark had split open in dozens of places, and we could see movement inside. The trunks. The faces weren't just pressing against the bark anymore, they were pushing through it, ghostly hands and arms reaching out into the real world. Sweet Jesus, Bobby whispered. They're breaking out. The largest oak was worst of all. Its trunk had split open like a massive wound, and dozens of spirit forms were crawling out, but they weren't human anymore. A century of pain and hunger had twisted them into something horrible. They moved like smoke but cast solid shadows, and their faces were masks of pure rage and desperation. We started pouring gasoline around the base of the trees, working as fast as we could. But the spirits had noticed us. They began to swarm, reaching out with those ghostly hands, trying to grab us and pull us back toward the trees. One of them touched my arm, and I felt cold, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just cold, the complete absence of warmth, of life, of hope. This was what Emma had felt. This was why she kept talking about how cold they were. "Bobby, light it. Light it now." He struck a flare, and the gasoline caught instantly. Flames roared up around the base of the largest oak, and the screaming that came from the tree was louder than anything we'd heard before. But this time, it wasn't just pain. It was relief. The spirits trapped inside were finally being set free. But the other trees weren't going to let us finish. Branches whipped down at us like massive arms, and the spirits that had already escaped began rushing toward us in a wave of fury and hunger. One of them grabbed Bobby around the throat. I watched in horror as his skin began to turn gray and bark-like wherever the spirit touched him. He was being transformed, turned into wood, just like the original prisoners had been. I grabbed my axe and swung it right through the spirit's arm. The blade passed through like it was hitting smoke, but somehow it worked. The spirit let go of Bobby and retreated, its arm dissolving into wisps. Iron, I realized. Joseph had mentioned iron. These spirits had been executed in the old times, before metal tools were common. Iron was like poison to them. "The axe!" I yelled to Bobby. "Use the metal tools!" He grabbed his own axe, and we started fighting our way through the swarm of spirits toward the other trees. Every swing of our blades made them retreat, but there were so many of them, and more kept pouring out of the split trunks. We managed to light 3 more trees before they overwhelmed us. I found myself pressed against the bark of one of the oaks, and I could feel it trying to pull me in, trying to make me part of its wooden prison. The faces in the bark were so close I could see their individual features. Men and women who had been trapped here for decades, maybe centuries. But then something changed. The flames were spreading, and as each tree caught fire, the spirits inside weren't fighting anymore. They were grateful. I could see it in their faces as the fire freed them from their wooden cages. One by one, they stopped trying to grab us and instead began to fade away, finally moving on to whatever comes next. The largest oak was the last to burn completely. As the flames consumed it, I swear I saw hundreds of spirits rising from the smoke. Men, women, children, all the people who had been trapped in that cursed grove. They looked at us once before drifting away, and in their eyes I saw something I hadn't expected. Peace. The fire burned for 3 days. Officially, it went down in the records as a controlled burn for forest management purposes. Nobody questioned it. The drought made such fires common that summer. Bobby never fully recovered from his encounter with the spirits. The bark-like scars across his chest and arm never faded, and sometimes, on cold nights, he says he can still feel them trying to pull him back to that grove. He took early retirement 6 months later and moved to Florida. Said he needed to be somewhere warm. Emma Henderson's family moved away. I, too. The bark fragments embedded in her skin eventually fell out on their own, but she was never quite the same. Her parents said she would wake up screaming about the cold, about voices calling to her from the forest. As for me, I served out the rest of my time as a ranger, but I retired early too. These days, I spend my time researching Cherokee history and learning about the old ways. Joseph Crow Feather has become a good friend, teaching me about the balance between the living world and the spirit world. The grove has grown back, but it's different now. New trees, young and healthy, have sprouted where the ancient oaks once stood. Wildlife has returned to the area. The cold spots are gone, and the whispers have stopped. But sometimes, when I hike up there on quiet evenings, I can still smell smoke on the wind. And sometimes I think I see figures moving between the new trees, not trapped anymore, but watching, making sure that what happened there is never forgotten. I've told this story to a few people over the years, and most of them think I'm just an old man with too much imagination. That's fine by me. Let them think what they want. But if you ever find yourself in a place where the trees are dying for no reason, where the animals won't go, where you can hear voices in the wind, listen to them. Really listen. Sometimes the spirits aren't trying to hurt you. Sometimes they're just trying to tell you their story. And sometimes the only mercy you can offer is to let them burn. Some places hold on to pain, you see. Hold on to it for decades, even centuries. The Cherokee knew this. They understood that some wounds run so deep they poison the very ground. But fire purifies. Fire sets things free. I learned that lesson on Panther Mountain, and I've never forgotten it. The trees don't scream anymore, but I still remember their voices. I remember because someone should. Omiwan has to bear witness to what happened up there, in that grove where the spirits waited so long to be set free. The mountains keep their secrets well, but this one needed to be told. So, now you know too. And if you ever hear trees screaming in the wind, you'll know what it means. You'll know they're ready to go home.